So he's about 6, 7 years old, memorizes the Quran as a 6, 7-year-old. So he memorizes the Quran relatively quickly. And of course, memorizing the Quran was not uncommon at the time. Children would memorize the Quran very regularly. And then his mother took him to memorize the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So he memorized about 7,000 Hadiths by the age of 12. Okay, by the age of 12. And he says that not only did he memorize the 7,000 Ahadith, but he also at that point had memorized, by the age of 10 to 12 years old, he said he finished memorizing all of what he could find of the works of 2 people. One of them was Waki' ibn al-Jarrah. Waki' ibn al-Jarrah is a famous teacher of Imam al-Shafi'i. May Allah be pleased with them both. A very famous poem, شَكَوْتُ إِلَى وَكِيعٍ سُوءَ حِفْظِي فَأَرْشَدَنِي إِلَى تَرْكِ الْمَعَاصِي, that I complained to Waki' about the weakness of my memory, so he told me to stop sinning, because he said that the knowledge of Allah is light, and Nurullah la yu'ta li'asi, and the light of Allah would not be given to a disobedient person. So Waki' told Shafi'i, if you want your memory, don't sin. So the connection of tazkiyah to text, all right, is very clear here from Waki'. So he said, what I had of al-Waki' ibn al-Jarrah, his rasail, his short treatises, things of that sort, I memorized everything that I could from him. And he said, I memorized what I found from Abdullah al-Mubarak. Obviously back then, you know, you have a lot of these books that did not survive because they were either absorbed into bigger books that did reach us, or because they were lost over time, because they were replaced or they were destroyed by the Mongols as well, which is the case of many books. So by the age of 16, he says at that point, his mother then, you know, supported him in his journey, and he basically spent his time going from scholar to scholar to scholar to scholar in the region. So by the age of 16, al-Bukhari counted, how many scholars do you think he would have had by the age of 16? He said by the age of 16, he had sat in the circles of 1,800 scholars. By the time he got to 16, he already had sat with 1,800 scholars. And there's this famous incident that takes place when he's 11. He goes to a prominent hadith scholar of his time by the name of Ad-Dakhili, Imam Ad-Dakhili. And, you know, Imam Ad-Dakhili, as he was teaching, he said, حدثنا Sufyan an Abi Zubair an Ibrahim. So he was going through the sanad, going through the chains. Now, most of the time when you sit in these classes and they're going through the sanad, you're not really paying attention to the sanad, you're waiting for the text, right? So he said, Bukhari raised his hand. He was 11 years old, and he said, Sheikh Abu Zubair did not relate. He never related from Ibrahim, which was crazy to him. He said, Ad-Dakhili said, of course he did. He said, no, he didn't. So Ad-Dakhili was confused. You know, who's this 11-year-old kid telling me there's a problem in my sanad? So he said, Sayyidi irja' ila al-asl. Said he told him, you know, my teacher, just go back and check your notes. So he came back. He went back home. He was so perplexed by Bukhari challenging him on the sanad. He went back home. He went through his notes, and he came back, and he had a big smile on his face, and he said, "Haddatha an man idhan." He said, so who did he relate from? So Bukhari corrected him, and he said, Sufyan related from Az-Zubair from Adi from Ibrahim. So there was a missing link, a man by the name of Adi. So he laughed, Ad-Dakhili laughed, and he said, Sadaqt. He said, you've told the truth. He said, وَنِعْمَ الْغُلَامِ أَنْتَ. What a great young man you are. وَسَيَكُونُ لَكَ شَأْنٌ. And you will have a great standing in the sight of the people. And so one of the things that's really important here is these words of encouragement stuck with these scholars. Imam Abu Hanifa meeting his teacher. These young students of knowledge kind of all go back to these moments in their biographies where they met a great scholar of their time who said to them, you're going to be something one day. So Ad-Dakhili was the first person to tell him that. Yeah.
What does that interaction look like? I'm like, yo, yeah, you missed the person. like how would that?
It's raising your hand and saying that there's someone missing in the chain of narrators, and the teacher saying, wait, what are you talking about?
Like there's no like I'm surprised that there's no ego. Like, what are you talking about? You're 11 years old.
Well, that's a sign of a great scholar. Ad-Dakhili was a great scholar, right? So he didn't. A lot of other scholars would have probably responded and retaliated with a sense of ego, right? So he didn't, which was one of the reasons why Bukhari remembered him fondly in this regard. So Bukhari at this point, he used to collect alwah, which are the scrolls. So he used to kind of fill his house up. He had a bunch of notebooks where he was taking notes. And then what's mentioned about the genius of al-Bukhari, and this was sort of how he became known to his peers, was he basically stopped needing to write. And none of you are able to stop needing to write, nor am I. Al-Bukhari was unique in this regard, that he stopped needing to write, that his memory sort of captured everything in this regard. There was a hadith scholar of the time by the name of Hashid ibn Ismail. Hashid was a friend of al-Bukhari. He was the same age as him. He said that I used to be with al-Bukhari and a third friend of mine, and we used to go to the ulama of Basra in Iraq as teenagers, and we used to frequent the hadith circles. So he says that I and the other friend, we were, listening and writing down everything. He said, as for al-Bukhari, he wasn't writing anything at that point. So we were curious about that. So we said to each other, why isn't he writing? And is he just wasting his time? And so they started to mess with al-Bukhari, and they started to say to him, why are you wasting your time? And they started to condemn him and admonish him. And al-Bukhari would just keep it to himself. He was silent. He didn't say anything to them. And then they started to make fun of him, right? They said, that maybe you just don't know how to write anymore. I mean, they started to make fun of him. And he said to them, listen, you guys have taken it too far. He says, go ahead and recite to me what you have written down. Okay? So we took out our alwah, we took out our scrolls, and we recited to him, and we went from the morning to the evening, and we recited over 15,000 ahadith to him in just this one day of sitting. And he says that after we finished reciting, al-Bukhari went back and started to recite to us everything that we recited to him in order, without missing a single word. So we were looking at him, basically our mouths dropped. And he said to him, so do you see me wasting my time? Do you see me playing around? So Hashid says that me and my friend looked at each other, and he says, we realized that no one can ever mess with this young man, that this is not a person. لا يتقدم عليه أحد. No one's ever going to beat this person.